All right, hello everybody. I feel like Joy making these videos, but Jay here, and I'm going to talk to you about Dr. Joe Barrett and the amazing conversation I had with him a couple of weeks ago. Joe's based out of Brock, and he's super quotable. So I felt that this quote was the best to introduce my presentation. And Joe mentioned that the pursuit of knowledge should be free of shackles, and so many connections can be made to that way of thinking. So, where's Joe from? What's the connections? Maybe I wanted to dig a little bit deeper in terms of like where he's come from and how that's dictated where he is currently. So, like very important people in my life, he grew up in the small mining town of Timmins, Ontario, and he's made his way all the way to see Isaac Brock at Brock University here in southwestern Ontario. That happens to be a connection because my wife and her family is from Timmins. Her dad, my father-in-law, Jamie, myself, we all went to Brock, as you can tell. So many cool connections were made as Joe and I were talking. So what are my impressions of Joe as we had that hour-long conversation? We went off script. I sent him some questions, but we went off script. What I realized is that he's a complete professional. He's genuine. He's humble. Again, quotable. Gold shines on its own. A connection to the mining town of Timmins, but also the way that he holds himself. He's incredibly passionate about what he's doing. And he's got sort of this quiet leadership. It's reminiscent of Dan, where he's not going to jump out and be this cheerleader, but you respect him and he's this leader. He lets his work talk for him. So I got the same impression from Joe. He's also very inclusive. He wants, quote, change for all. And I was really appreciative of that and hopeful after talking with him. And we had a previous conversation at a bar in Newfoundland, but that's another story. So the theoretical background of Dr. Barrett is based on Boyer's three perspectives. There's the scholarship of engagement, and that's what we all went through with teaching, the transformation and transference of knowledge, keeping that flame going. There's a scholarship of discovery. That's where we are right now. It's knowledge for its own sake, kind of jumping into the unknown, action research, all that type of stuff. And here's where he is currently. He's in the scholarship of integration. It's giving meaning to the isolated facts, placing specialists and specializations of our subject into light. He wants to go where people haven't gone before. He wants to talk about it, and he wants to make connections between the transference of information and the practicality of engaging that information and gained knowledge. So his current research interests involve school-based health policy, physical education, teacher education, physical educator self-efficacy and identity, and student engagement. He also has a huge motivation, and I love how he put this, of students within the margins, those who aren't spoken for. And this happens up in northern communities in Ontario, across all of Canada, especially in the north, with Indigenous populations, etc. So another connection to Timmins there. So it's kind of sieving through, hey, what's the motivation behind all of this, Joe? And he said, maybe it is a little bit connected to where I come from, but getting to know him more, it makes sense that he wants to go and speak for those who are within and without privilege. I don't have a lot of exposure to Indigenous populations in southwestern Ontario, but my wife, Jamie, her dad, who was a principal, and they may have Joe and him may have crossed paths up there in Timmins. There's people within and without privilege. Who does that sound like? Dan the man. Again, so as I was talking, I was like, oh, no wonder you two get along so well. And he's all about he's not the front liner. He's not a rah folk. I love how he put that. He's not rah folk. You're not going to see Dan and him out there in the front lines screaming and shouting and jamming things down people's throats about having to change the world and all that jazz. They let the work speak for themselves, or for itself. Okay, they're out there, they're doing their jobs, they understand their position, and they're gonna let their hard work speak. tenfold. Currently, Joe's working on a Canadian compendium of strategies for physical educators, in-service and pre-service physical educators. It's all Canadian. I would imagine Dan may have a contribution there. So he's really looking forward to working on that, and that's been quite a long time coming. He's recently published an article on student grouping and PE, which I found really illuminating. It relates to social responsibility that we all have within our PE classrooms. Over the course of our hour-long conversation, I was getting this impression that he's all about practice-oriented research, making the changes, going through the theory, going through the academics, but also to be focused on practicality. He wants to make things useful. He's worked with the Dairy Farmers of Canada to come up with a program for kids and calcium, etc. So stuff like that, the practical. So he was saying, where do we need to go from here? Or I asked him that. I said, hey, where do we need to go from here? So he talks about how we need to focus on social responsibility and resiliency. He came to me with a story about a grade 2 student in PE and how grade 2 students and how those younger grades deal with rejection. And we need to teach them that. That's a part of our curriculum, those living skills. He wants to set the direction and the focus on HPE with policies and mandates that PE communities buy into. So he may mention that we need to have some policies in place, and we need to get the buy-in from PE teachers across the country. Again, that connects to this practicality that he really emphasizes. Get it in the classroom. We got to use it. There's no point in just writing about it. Let's use it. So I was really respectful of that. And he wants to create unity across our HPE community, from the research council to our grassroots to academics, with a focus on health literacy, because he said it's a bit of an omen with the physical literacy. What is physical literacy? Is there such thing as physical literacy? We should be contesting it. But how that came into our country was because we did not have a voice. We didn't introduce it ourselves. We let other people come in and talk about physical literacy for us. And he said, this is an omen. We got to get, if we did this right, it would be 10 times better. We didn't do it right. And now we're paying the price. We're scattered, we're fragmented. We got to improve on how health literacy works. So thought that was pretty cool. He had a few words for the group before I jump into my article analysis. He says, through failure, there will always be success. And that's only when you find your passion. And even when you find your passion and you fail, it's going to make you hungrier. Little connection to Austin Matthews there. If you watched the game a couple weeks ago, you got to pay attention to the details. Check, check, check. Always do your homework. And this is something cool. We should write this all on our chalkboards. We should write this. We should get it tattooed. Write, reflect, review, refine, and then do it again. And that's what he teaches his students. And I think that we can really value that. So write, reflect, review, refine, and do it again. And there's a reason why Joe's in his place and he's respected, and it's because of that mentality. So a lot of people think I'd be quite stupid to analyze an article that Dan and his wife co-authored, but here we are. I felt that this article was very important, culturally relevant physical education, educative conversations with Mi'kmaq elders and community leaders from the In Education Journal, but it connected to what Joe was focusing on, those people in the margins, and then somehow making it practical. So participants, they fell into two categories: Mi'kmaq elders and physical activity educational leaders. And it consisted of 8 males, 2 females, who derived from 7 Mi'kmaq regions. And it also involved a little bit of student voice there. So the method was the most important part, in my opinion. It involved Archibald's story work model. And what that was is, or what that is rather, is a focus on conversations rather than structured interviews. In Western academia, we focus on structure, especially when it comes to qualitative and quantitative data collection. So the story work model involves the validity of the voice of the elders within the community. So they went out, it was more of a conversation, they recorded and transcribed these conversations, and that's how they collected their data over a year span. So this was a heavy study. So the objective was to engage with the culturally relevant physical education within the scope of Mi'kmaq community, and to analyze how the 4 criteria, Hallel's 4 criteria played into that. And they developed conversation pieces around that. And in my opinion, that any other method other than the story work practice would be insufficient. So that was my opinion. I think that the authors would agree. And just to let you know, this is how Halasanal's 4 criteria works. I'll get to read that really quick. So the results were focused on these 4 categories, all based off qualitative conversation pieces that were transcribed, connecting to that story work technique, which connects back to oral histories and our own personal Western academic colonizing language and research practice. So the results were that there needs to be an emphasized need to build safe and harmonious environments in the classroom and having teachers contribute outside the classroom. Teachers slowly obtained the understanding, which I found really interesting, this whole idea of the understanding between themselves and Mi'kmaq communities and their students. And delivering and developing the culturally responsive curriculum, it's going to help engage your students towards HPE. So in the conversations they had, it talked about how hockey may have been, or most likely was, a Mi'kmaq game before being formally invented down in Windsor, what have you. The strengths are extensive. The format alone matched the objectives, which I found very unique. I've never read anything like this, where they focused on a indigenous method of transference of knowledge for a purpose of gaining an understanding of what was happening in the community. The efforts were made towards academic and Aboriginal ethics were outstanding. I thought they were really, really interesting. I never knew that needed to occur. And then there was this modesty, which made the content approachable. We knew this was going to be ongoing. The researchers knew that there was no end to this. It was going to be a continuous affair. The research eliminated a few things, is that what we do as researchers can be further marginalizing to those without privilege, especially those within the margins, as Joe put it. Teachers need to become part of that community, the emphasis on that, because Indigenous communities emphasize just that, community. The teachers need to be part of that. And then again, questioning our Western academia practices. And this study also considered student voice, which I found very illuminating. With regard to weaknesses and wonderings, I think I was questioning whether or not Barrett and his desire for policy played into this study. I'm not sure. I don't think that was the objective, but I found it surprising. Not a weakness, maybe surprising that there wasn't more push for policy moving forward, or maybe we had to assume that this should be the new policy, the new norm, as I put it in my article analysis. Although it's been made mention in previous presentations, this difference between qualitative and quantitative, but again, the qualitative data collection was the story work methodology. And then I kind of thought that ended up being a strength. So there we go. And I was a little bit surprised. I thought that more needed to be done to consider the grander gaze across Canada, and to consider that. So assumptions were probably made on behalf of the reader. Hey, if this works in this sort of microcosm, we need to make sure that it happens across the country. So I think maybe a little bit more with that could have been beneficial. Again, it's awkward because Dan teaches the course and works so closely with Joe. And then finally, I want to leave with some ideas that Joe came up with maintaining our momentum. He never gets ahead of himself. He's modest. We all need to demonstrate modesty. We need to emphasize respect. We need to understand that we all come from privilege through this or that. We need to understand that we need to respect our positions and community. We need to feed off the passions and the questions of teacher candidates. We need to feed off of our students. We need to feed off of what others are doing in the academic community. So that's Dr. Joe Barrett. Awesome guy. I'm sure I'll run into him again in the future. Thanks for listening, and take care.